I never told the CEO that I am the anonymous investor with $10 billion worth of shares in his father company. Julian Vane, the CEO, thinks I'm a ghost. He thinks I'm the girl who just makes his espresso at exactly 175 degrees and disappears into the marble. He has no idea that for 3 years I haven't been working for him, I've been dismantling him. While he was mocking my thrift store blazer, I was buying up 51% of his debt through a shell company he's too arrogant to see. But today, the game changes. I'm not just quitting, I'm pulling the trigger on the largest corporate execution in Florida history. And the best part? He's the one who handed me the gun. I used to think that the most powerful thing in the world was money. I spent my childhood watching my father build things, real things, out of code and sweat. I watched him believe that if you were the smartest person in the room, you were safe. I was wrong. The most powerful thing in the world is being invisible. My name is Alara. To Julian Vane, the CEO of Vane Global, I am not a person. I am a ghost in a $40 thrift store blazer. I am the girl who ensures his espresso is exactly 175 degrees, not 174, not 176, because Julian believes the temperature of his caffeine is a measure of his dominance over the world. I'm the girl who types the memos he doesn't read. I'm the girl who stands in the corner of the boardroom, holding a tablet recording the minutes of men who discuss millions of dollars as if they're playing a game of Monopoly. For 3 years, I've walked these marble floors in Miami, the sun blindingly bright through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I've watched them. I've watched the way Julian treats the little people, the way he looks through the janitor, the way he snaps his fingers at the valet, and the way he looks at me. Or rather, the way he doesn't look at me. To him, I'm a piece of office furniture, a desk that talks, a filing cabinet that breathes. He has no idea that every time he mocks my poor girl lunch or makes a comment about the scuff on my sensible heels, I am calculating. He thinks he's the king of Florida real estate. He thinks Vane Global is a fortress. But every fortress has a foundation, and he has no idea that I am the one who owns the dirt it sits on. It was a Tuesday. It's always a Tuesday when the world starts to burn. The humidity in Miami was thick enough to choke you, but inside the Vane Global Tower it was a crisp, artificial 68 degrees. I walked into Julian's office. He was standing with his back to me, looking out at the Atlantic. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He knew my scent. Cheap lavender soap, and the faint smell of the bus exhaust I had to ride for an hour to get here. "You're 4 minutes late, Alara," he said. His voice was like velvet dipped in acid. "The drawbridge was up on the way in, Julian. I apologize to your secretary." He turned then. Julian Vane is a man designed by marketing teams, perfectly tailored suit, hair that cost more than my monthly rent, and eyes that held the warmth of a shark's eye. "I don't pay you to talk to my secretary. I pay you to be here before I realize I need you." He walked toward me, taking the cup from my hand. He didn't say thank you. He took a sip, his eyes narrowing. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the trash can and poured the $7 artisanal coffee directly into the bin. "It's cold," he lied. It wasn't cold. I could see the steam. "Go again. And Alara?" "Yes?" "Try to look a bit more presentable today. We have the representatives from the Phoenix Group coming by the lobby later. I don't want them thinking we hire from the local shelter." I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, not out of shame, but out of a simmering tectonic rage. The Phoenix Group. He was talking about my group. He was talking about the anonymous entity that had been quietly propping up his failing developments for the last 18 months. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking just a little. "Of course, Julian, I'll see to it." Later that afternoon, I sat in my cubicle, a gray box tucked behind a pillar where the light didn't quite reach. I opened my personal laptop, the one I kept hidden in a locked drawer. I logged in to the encrypted portal of the Phoenix Group. Most people in my position would have spent the money. If you had $10 billion waiting for you, would you sit in a cubicle? Would you take the bus? Would you eat canned soup? But you have to understand my father. He was a genius who was cheated out of his life's work by Julian Vane's father, Marcus Vane. They stole the patents, they stole the credit, they drove him to a broken heart and an early grave. My father's last words to me weren't about love, they were about justice. "Don't just take the money, Alara," he whispered, his hand thin and cold in mine. "Take the crown. Make them watch as you dismantle everything they built with my blood." So I waited. For 3 years I lived as a pauper. I collected the evidence. I learned the weaknesses of every board member. I watched Julian make illegal offshore transfers to cover his gambling debts in Macau. I was the ghost of Florida. I was the silent partner holding 51% of the voting shares through a series of shell companies that Julian was too arrogant to investigate. Before I tell you about the moment the mask began to slip, look at that subscribe button. If you see it's still red, it means you're the kind of person who would let Julian Vane pour that coffee out. You're letting the bullies win. Subscribe now to stand with the invisible. Or, if you're fine with the villains taking everything, leave a comment explaining why you're staying on their side. The meeting was set for 3 p.m. The board was panicked. Vane Global was over-leveraged on a luxury condo project in South Beach that was sinking, literally, into the sand. They needed a cash infusion. They needed the Phoenix. Julian was pacing the boardroom like a caged tiger. "Where are they?" he barked at me. "Alara, did you confirm the arrival of the Phoenix representative?" "They said they would be here in spirit, Julian," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. "They prefer to operate through digital proxy." "I don't want a proxy. I want a face. I want to know who is buying my debt." He slammed his hand on the mahogany table. I stood in the corner, my tablet in hand, recording his meltdown. I looked at the other board members, old men with silver hair and gold watches, all terrified. They had no idea that the representative was standing 5 feet away, wearing a blazer with a missing button on the cuff. "Maybe they don't like your face, Julian," one of the board members, Arthur, muttered. Julian spun on him. "I built this. My father built this. We don't take orders from an anonymous ghost." I looked down at my tablet. I had a button on the screen. It was a sell trigger. If I pressed it, the Phoenix Group would withdraw its intent to fund. Vane Global would be bankrupt by Friday. I hovered my thumb over the glass. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Do it," a voice in my head whispered. "End it now." But then Julian's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and a smirk spread across his face. "Never mind," he said, his voice dripping with newfound confidence. "I just got a message from our contact at the SEC. We don't need the Phoenix. We found a loophole." He looked over at me, his eyes full of malice. "Alara, you can stop taking notes. In fact, you can stop doing everything. Clear your desk by the end of the day. You're redundant." The silence in the room was deafening. Redundant. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I looked at Julian, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't look away. I didn't play the role of the mouse. "Is there a problem?" Julian asked, mocking me. "Did the poor girl lose her tongue?" "No," I said softly. "I was just thinking about the timing." "Of what?" "Of the crash." I turned and walked out of the boardroom. I didn't go to my desk. I went to the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw Julian laughing with Arthur, thinking he had won, thinking he had finally pruned the ugly weed from his garden. I stepped out into the lobby. The rain was starting to pour, a typical Florida afternoon deluge. I didn't have an umbrella. I didn't care. I pulled my personal phone from my pocket. I dialed a number I had memorized since I was 18. "This is the Phoenix," I said into the receiver. My voice didn't shake. It was cold. It was final. "Initiate protocol blackout. I want every share we hold dumped on the open market in 10-minute intervals, and send the file on Julian's Macau debts to the Internal Revenue Service." "Are you sure, ma'am? That will destroy the company's valuation." I looked up at the Vane Global logo glowing gold on the side of the building. "I don't want the money," I whispered. "I want the rubble." As I walked into the rain, my work phone started blowing up, message after message. Julian, the board, the CFO. The first message from Julian read, "What did you do? The stock is tanking. Get back here now." I dropped the phone into a street-side puddle and kept walking. The invisible girl was gone, and the storm was just beginning. I stood on the corner of Biscayne Boulevard, the rain soaking through my thrifted blazer until it felt like lead against my skin. At my feet, my work phone lay submerged in a gutter puddle. The screen flickered one last time, a frantic, distorted notification from Julian before going black. In that moment, I wasn't cold. For the first time in 3 years, I felt a warmth spreading from my chest to my fingertips. It was the heat of a bridge burning. I looked up at the Vane Global Tower. Even through the sheets of gray rain, the gold-tinted windows shimmered with an arrogance that no longer had a foundation. Inside that building, Julian was likely screaming at a monitor, watching red candles flicker across his Bloomberg terminal. He was watching the unbreakable Vane legacy bleed out, $100 million at a time. He thought he fired an assistant. He didn't realize that he had just evicted the only person keeping the roof over his head. I hailed a taxi, not an Uber, nothing traceable to my digital footprint. "Overtown," I told the driver, "the old warehouse district." The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, eyes lingering on my soaked clothes and the cheap plastic bag holding my few belongings. To him, I was just another broken soul in a city that eats the poor for breakfast. He had no idea he was chauffeuring the woman who had just shifted the tectonic plates of the Florida economy. My apartment wasn't an apartment. It was a 600-square-foot studio located above a defunct printing press. To the neighbors, I was Ilara, the quiet girl who worked too hard and smelled like cheap coffee. But behind the reinforced steel door, the interior told a different story. 3 32-inch monitors dominated the far wall, their glow the only light in the room. A server rack hummed in the corner, a localized black box that bothered technicians through 6 different countries before they ever touched the Miami grid. I stripped off the wet blazer. I tossed the Target brand flats into the trash. I sat down in front of the monitors, the blue light washing over my face like a baptism. I opened the Phoenix Group's master ledger. The stock dump was working. Vane Global's valuation had dropped by 14% in the last 40 minutes. In the world of high-frequency trading, that's not a dip, that's a plane crash. But then I saw it. An order. Someone was trying to catch the falling knife. Someone was scooping up the shares I was dumping. I leaned in, my heart rate spiking. It wasn't Julian. He didn't have the liquid capital. It was Marcus Vane, Julian's father, the man who had actually destroyed my father. The old lion had woken up. Marcus Vane. Just saying the name made my throat tighten. I remember him standing in our living room when I was 12. He had worn a suit that cost more than our house. He told my father that the partnership was over, that the patents for the liquid cooling tech belonged to Vane Global, and that my father was free to pursue other ventures. My father died 6 months later. Not from a heart attack, though that's what the certificate said. He died because he realized that in this world, the lions don't just eat the sheep. They erase them. I watched the screen as Marcus's private equity firm began a counter-offensive. He was trying to stabilize the price. He was using his personal fortune to bridge the gap. "You want to play, Marcus?" I whispered to the empty room. "I've been waiting 15 years for this game." I didn't stop the dump. I accelerated it. But I didn't just sell Vane Global shares. I started shorting their secondary suppliers. The concrete companies, the glass manufacturers, the luxury interior firms Julian used for his penthouses. If I couldn't kill the lion yet, I would starve him by killing everything he planned to eat. My burner phone rang. Only 3 people had this number: my lawyer, my broker, and... I picked it up. I didn't speak. "Ilara?" It was Julian. His voice was unrecognizable. The velvet was gone. It was jagged, frantic, the sound of a man who had seen a ghost. "How did you get this number, Julian?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "The security footage," he hissed. I saw you in the server room before you left. You weren't clearing your desk. You were uploading something. What did you do? Why is the Phoenix Group liquidated?" "I told you, Julian, the timing of the crash. You should have checked the temperature of the coffee." "Listen to me, you little bitch," he screamed. I could hear things breaking in the background, glass shattering, chairs being thrown. "My father is losing $50 million an hour. If you don't stop whatever virus you put in our system, I will find you. I don't care where you're hiding. I'll have the police at your door in 10 minutes. "On what charges?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "I was an assistant. I don't have the clearance to crash a stock. That's what your lawyers will tell the SEC, right? Because if you admit I did have that power, you're admitting to gross negligence and fraud. Check your email, Julian. I sent you a parting gift." I hung up. The email I sent wasn't a virus. It was a photo of a small hand-drawn diagram my father had made in his final days. It was the original schematic for the Vane Global flagship tech, dated 3 years before Marcus Vane claimed to have invented it. It was a reminder. I wasn't just taking his money, I was reclaiming my name. An hour later, the news broke on CNBC. Vane Global CEO Julian Vane under investigation for offshore embezzlement. Board calls for immediate resignation. I watched the ticker scroll across the bottom of the screen. Julian wasn't just losing the company, he was losing his freedom. The Macau documents I'd leaked were the final nail. He had been stealing from his own father to fund his lifestyle. But I wasn't done. This was just the early conflict. Julian was the pawn. Marcus was the king. I looked at the third monitor. It showed a live feed of the Vane mansion in Coral Gables. A black car was pulling out of the driveway. Marcus was on the move. He was going to the one place he thought he was safe, the private vault where he kept the original theft documents. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. I didn't need the thrift store blazer anymore. I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out a leather trench coat. "The mouse is out of the hole, Marcus," I whispered. As I stepped out of the warehouse, a silver Mercedes pulled up. The window rolled down. It wasn't a hitman. It was Chloe, Julian's girlfriend, the woman who had mocked my poor girl smell only hours ago. She looked terrified. Her makeup was smeared with tears. "Ilara," she gasped. "Please, he's going to kill me. He thinks I helped you. You have to tell them I didn't know." I looked at her, and for a split second, I felt a flicker of pity. Then I remembered her laughing as Julian poured my coffee into the trash. "I don't have to tell them anything, Chloe," I said, walking past her. "In this story, you're not even background noise." I kept walking, leaving her sobbing in the rain. The first hour was over. The war had truly begun. They say that when you stare into the abyss stares back. But in Miami, when you stare into the shadow, you usually find a man in a gray suit with a telephoto lens. I was 3 blocks away from the warehouse when I saw it. A black Suburban with tinted windows, parked illegally near an alleyway. It didn't belong in Overtown. It was too clean, too expensive. It had Marcus Vane's security written all over its sleek, polished edges. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, uneven beat. I had been too careless. I had let the adrenaline of seeing Julian's world burn cloud my judgment. Marcus Vane didn't become a billionaire by waiting for the SEC to knock on his door. He became a billionaire by hunting. I ducked into a 24-hour laundromat, the smell of bleach and cheap detergent hitting me like a wall. I walked straight to the back, toward the service exit. In the reflection of a soap dispenser, I saw him. A man had stepped out of the Suburban. He wasn't a cop, he was a professional. He moved with the predatory grace of someone who gets paid to make people disappear. He was looking at his phone, likely tracking the signal from the burner I had just used to call Julian. I hadn't just burned the bridge, I had left a breadcrumb trail. I couldn't go back to the war room. If he found the servers, he found the Phoenix. I had to lead him away. I had to go into the lion's den. I took the Metro mover toward Brickell, the financial heart of Miami. It's a city of glass towers and steel hearts, where the air tastes like salt and greed. I moved through the crowd of bankers and lawyers, my leather coat pulled tight. I knew Marcus's lead investigator, a man named Elias Thorne. He was an ex-Mossad ghost who specialized in corporate reclamation. If he caught me, he wouldn't take me to a police station. He'd take me to a private room in one of Marcus's half-finished construction sites, and I'd never be heard from again. I walked into the lobby of the Intercontinental Hotel. It was bustling, chaotic, perfect. I sat down at a public computer in the business center, my eyes darting to the entrance. Elias was there. He was standing by the fountain, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a laser. He was 30 seconds away from spotting me. I didn't panic. I opened a browser and logged in to the Phoenix Group's emergency portal. If you want a face, Marcus, I'll give you a ghost. I didn't delete my files. I did something worse. I initiated a mirror protocol. I redirected every server request from the Phoenix Group to Julian Vane's personal home IP address. To anyone looking at the digital footprint, it would now look like the entire 10 billion sell-off was being orchestrated from Julian's bedroom. I was framing the son for the father's destruction. Elias Thorne began walking toward the business center. His hand went to his jacket, reaching for a radio or a weapon. I had 5 seconds. I hit enter. Suddenly, every screen in the hotel lobby flickered. The digital news ticker above the concierge desk changed. It didn't show the stock prices anymore. It showed a single image, the hand-drawn schematic of my father's tech, overlaid with the words, "Stolen by Vane." The lobby went silent. People stopped. They pointed. In the confusion, I stood up and walked directly toward Elias. I didn't hide. I walked right past him, my shoulder brushing his. "He's in the basement," I whispered as I passed, my voice disguised with a thick, artificial accent. He hesitated. For a split second, his professional instinct was overridden by the chaos I had created. He turned toward the stairs. I didn't look back. I ran for the exit. I reached the waterfront, the humid air sticking to my skin. I leaned against a railing, gasping for breath. My phone, the one I had kept hidden in my coat, buzzed. A new email. It wasn't an alert. It was an old file I had programmed to unlock today. A video. I clicked play. It was my father. He looked so thin. This was taken 2 days before he died. "Ilara," his voice was a rasping shadow of what it once was. "If you're watching this, you've started. But you need to know the truth. Marcus didn't act alone. There was a third partner. Someone who signed the papers. Someone who knew the tech was mine and chose the money instead." The camera panned slightly, and for a second I saw a hand in the frame. A hand wearing a very specific ring. A signet ring with a crest I knew. It wasn't a Vane crest. It was my mother's family crest. The betrayal didn't start with Marcus Vane. It started inside my own house. My mother hadn't died of a broken heart after my father passed. She'd disappeared with a settlement paid for by the blood of my father's genius. I felt a coldness settle over me that the Miami sun could never melt. I closed the video. The grief was gone, replaced with a crystalline, focused rage. Julian was a clown, Marcus was a thief, but my mother, she was a traitor. I looked at the skyline. The Vane Global Tower was still there, but it looked different now. It looked like a tomb. I pulled up my banking app. I had $10 billion. I had the power to buy almost anything on Earth, but money can't buy back a father, and it can't erase a betrayal that goes back to the womb. I typed a command into my terminal. Find her, I commanded the AI search bot I had built. Find Elena Vance. Use the signet ring as a biometric marker. Search every high-end estate in Switzerland, the Caymans, and the Hamptons. The computer chirped. A hit. She wasn't in Switzerland. She was in a penthouse 6 blocks away. She was living under a fake name, funded by a trust managed by Marcus Vane. The circle was complete. I stood up, the wind whipping my hair across my face. "I'm not just coming for the company, Marcus," I whispered to the wind. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm. I spun around, ready to strike, but I stopped. It was Julian. He looked pathetic. His suit was ruined, his eyes bloodshot. He was shaking. "Ilara," he sobbed, "I know it's you. I know you're the Phoenix. Please, my father is going to kill me. He thinks I stole the money. You have to tell him the truth. You have to save me." I looked at him, the man who had poured my coffee in the trash just hours ago. "Julian, I think it's time you learned what it's like to be invisible." I shoved him back, and as he stumbled, I saw Elias Thorne emerging from behind him. "There she is," Elias said into his radio. I didn't run. I smiled, because I wasn't alone. Behind me, 3 blacked-out SUVs from the SEC were pulling to the curb. The gamble had paid off. They say the truth will set you free, but they never tell you that the truth is a cold, windowless room in a federal building with a recording device blinking red in the center of a metal table. I sat across from Agent Miller of the SEC. To him, I was the star witness, the disgruntled assistant who had happened to stumble upon the digital trail of Julian Vane's embezzlement. He didn't see the $10 billion predator sitting in a thrift store blouse. He saw a victim, and I played the part to perfection. "Miss Ilara," Miller said, leaning forward, "the data we received from the Phoenix leak is staggering. It suggests Julian Vane hasn't just been skimming, he's been running a shadow ledger for 5 years. But we need you to verify the source of these Macau transfers." I looked down at my hands, forcing them to tremble, just enough to be believable. "Julian always told me to look the other way," I said, whispering. "He said if I ever opened the Project Icarus files, I'd find myself at the bottom of the bay. I was just scared, Agent. I'm still scared." Miller's face softened. "You're safe now, but we need to move fast. Marcus Vane is moving assets as we speak. If we don't freeze the accounts in the next hour, the money vanishes." I wasn't worried about the money vanishing. I was the one moving it. While I sat in this room, my automated scripts were bleeding the Vane accounts dry, diverting them into a recovery fund for the families my father's tech was supposed to help. Between the questions, my mind drifted back to the penthouse 6 blocks away. Elena Vance, my mother. I remember her as a woman who smelled like expensive perfume and secrets. After my father died, she told me we were broke. She told me the Vanes had taken everything. She sent me to live with an aunt while she handled the legalities. Then she vanished. I thought she was a victim. I lived in poverty for years, fueled by a desire to avenge both of them. And now I knew the perfume was paid for by the man who broke my father's heart. She hadn't just left, she had traded me for a penthouse with a view of the ocean. "Miss Ilara, are you with us?" Miller asked. "Yes," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm with you, and I think you should check the residency records for the Azure Heights penthouse. There's a silent partner living there who might have the keys to Marcus Vane's offshore encryption." I wasn't just giving them Julian, I was serving them my mother on a silver platter. I was released, pending further investigation, 2 hours later. I stood on the sidewalk as the sun began to set over Miami, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. I pulled out my phone. It was time for the second part of the fallout. I didn't send a text. I made a public post. From the verified Phoenix Group account, the one the whole world was now watching, I posted a single link. The cost of a soul. The Vane Vance Chronicles. It was a data dump of every wire transfer from Marcus Vane to Elena Vance. It included the silence agreement she signed 3 days after my father's funeral. It included photos of her at various galas under her new alias, smiling while her daughter lived on ramen and spite. I hailed a car and told the driver to pass by the Vane Global headquarters. I wanted to see it. The scene was pure chaos. Blue and red lights reflected off the gold glass of the tower. I saw Julian. He was being led out in handcuffs. He wasn't the king of Miami anymore. He looked small. His hair was a mess, his shirt untucked. The cameras were everywhere, flashes strobing like lightning. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second as he was pushed into the back of a police cruiser. He didn't see a poor girl anymore. He saw the person who had dismantled his life. I didn't wave, I didn't gloat. I simply stood there, invisible in the crowd, watching the trash being taken out. But then I saw him, Marcus Vane. He wasn't in handcuffs, not yet. He stood on the steps of the building, surrounded by a phalanx of lawyers. He looked directly at me. He didn't look angry, he looked impressed. He raised a hand, 2 fingers to his temple in a mock salute, before disappearing back into the building. The fallout hadn't touched him yet. He had sacrificed his son to save the empire. I ended the night back at the waterfront. The first hour of my new life was over. Julian was in a cell. My mother's name was being dragged through the digital mud of every news outlet in the country. Vane Global's stock was a penny stock. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark water of the bay, I realized something terrifying. I didn't feel happy. I felt empty. I had spent 3 years being a ghost, and now that I had the power, I didn't know how to be a person again. I had $10 billion, but I was still standing in the rain, alone. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You play the game well, Alara, but you forgot one thing. The phoenix always burns its own nest. See you at the board meeting tomorrow. I'll be the one in the center chair. MV." The board meeting, the one where the anonymous investor was supposed to be revealed. Marcus knew. He knew the whole time. He had let me destroy Julian because Julian was a liability. He had let me expose Elena because she was a loose end. He hadn't been hunted by me. He had been using me to clean his house. I gripped the railing until my knuckles turned white. "You think you won, Marcus?" I whispered. "You think this was the end?" I opened my laptop one more time. I had one more file, one Marcus didn't know about, the one my father had hidden inside the schematics. "Chapter 1 is over," I said to the dark water, "but the war just got expensive." Marcus Vane's text message felt like a cold blade pressed against my spine. He knew. He had watched me destroy his son and his mistress like a man watching a play from the royal box. I was back in the war room. The blue light of the monitors felt different now, less like a weapon and more like a cage. If Marcus knew I was the Phoenix, why hadn't he stopped me? Why let me tank his stock? Why let me humiliate his family? I went back to the source. I opened my father's original Project Icarus files. I had looked at these schematics 1,000 times. Liquid cooling pipes, heat exchangers, high-efficiency processors for server farms. It was brilliant, yes, but it was just hardware, or so I thought. I began to dig deeper into the sublayers of the code. I ran a decryption algorithm I had developed specifically for my father's logic patterns. "Talk to me, Dad. What did you build that was worth a life?" The screen flickered. The cooling schematics didn't disappear, they shifted. The pipes weren't just for coolant, they were fiber optic channels. The heat exchangers weren't just moving thermal energy, they were intercepting data packets at a hardware level. It wasn't a cooling system, it was a Trojan horse built into the physical infrastructure of the internet. My hands began to go numb as I realized what Marcus was actually building. Vane Global didn't want to be a real estate giant. They were installing this cooling tech into every major government data center, every bank, every social media server farm in the Western world. If the liquid cooling tech was the foundation, then Marcus Vane was currently building a global surveillance network that could bypass every encryption, every firewall, and every law on the books. He wasn't upset about the stock price because the stock price didn't matter. He was days away from turning on the Phoenix Eye. And the worst part? He was using my money to do it. The Phoenix Group's investments hadn't just saved his company, they had funded the final phase of his global panopticon. I hadn't been dismantling his empire, I had been the silent architect of its completion. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. The board meeting was in 6 hours. Marcus expected me to show up, defeated, and hand over the final encryption keys to save the company from the mess I had made. He thought he had me cornered. He thought that because I was my father's daughter, I would value the tech over everything else. But he forgot one thing. I wasn't just my father's daughter, I was the girl he had spent 3 years treating like a ghost, and ghosts don't have anything left to lose. I reached for a hard drive, a physical kill switch my father had mentioned in one of his journals. It was hidden in an old safe deposit box in a bank that was now, ironically, owned by a subsidiary of the Phoenix Group. I arrived at the bank just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. The city was awakening, oblivious to the fact that their digital lives were about to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The vault was cold, silent. I opened box 714. Inside was a single, outdated USB drive and a handwritten note. For Ilara, if you are reading this, the lion has found the teeth. Remember, water doesn't just cool, it drowns. I plugged the drive into my portable deck. The code was ancient, assembly language, but it was pure. It was a back door to the back door. If I could get close enough to the Vane Global main server, I could turn the liquid cooling system against itself. I could literally melt the processors before the surveillance network went live. But as I turned to leave, the vault door didn't budge. The lights flickered and died. The emergency red lights kicked in. A voice came over the intercom. It wasn't the bank manager. "It's a beautiful morning for a board meeting, Ilara, but I think you're going to be a little late. Why don't you sit there and think about your father while the air runs out? It's poetic, don't you think?" Marcus Vane's voice boomed over the intercom. I leaned against the cold metal of the vault. I wasn't screaming, I wasn't crying. Marcus thought he had trapped me. He thought that this was his checkmate. But he made one fatal mistake. He used the Vane Global security system to lock this vault, the very system that was now integrated with my father's tech. I opened my deck. I didn't try to hack the door. I hacked the cooling. "Want to see how the Phoenix burns, Marcus?" I whispered. I bypassed the thermal limits of the bank's server room. Within seconds, the fire suppression system triggered. In a high-security bank, a fire suppression system doesn't just spray water, it vents the oxygen and opens every emergency exit for the safety of the occupants. The vault door hissed and swung open. I stepped out into the lobby as the alarms wailed. The guards were confused, blinded by the halogen emergency lights. I walked past them, the USB drive gripped in my hand like a dagger. I walked out into the Miami heat. My phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Vane Global to announce the Phoenix project at 9 a.m. board meeting. Marcus Vane to retake full control. I checked my watch. 8:15 a.m. I didn't need a taxi. I didn't need a plan. I just needed to get to the top floor. "I'm coming for the crown, Marcus," I said, stepping into a waiting car I had pre-ordered under his own name, "and I'm bringing the water with me." The Vane Global Tower looked like a hive of angry hornets. Police tape fluttered in the salty breeze, and a sea of reporters was held back by steel barricades. They were waiting for Marcus Vane to emerge like a Caesar, promising to restore order to the chaos I had created. They were looking for the Phoenix, a mysterious billionaire, a corporate raider, a titan. They weren't looking for a girl in a catering uniform. I had swapped my leather coat for a stained white apron and a black baseball cap pulled low. I was carrying a crate of artisanal bottled water. To the security guards at the service entrance, I was just another nameless laborer meant to hydrate the elite. "ID?" the guard grunted, his eyes fixated on the chaos of the press line. I handed him a forged badge. The name on it was Sarah. He didn't even look at my face. He didn't see Alara, the assistant he'd ignored for years. He saw a uniform. "Go on through," he muttered, waving me into the service elevator. The doors closed, and for a moment the silence was deafening. I pressed the button for the 42nd floor, the mechanical level. Marcus would be in the penthouse boardroom on 50, but the heart of his beast, the server core, was 8 floors below. As the elevator climbed, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Every chime was a reminder of how much of the world was at stake. Ding! Vane Global Marcus Vane has just entered the boardroom. Ding! Vane Global stock is miraculously rebounding as the Phoenix Project rumors leak to the press. Ding! An arrest warrant has been issued for Julian Vane's accomplice, me. They were looking for me in the streets, in the airports, in the banks. They didn't realize I was currently rising through the very center of their empire. The elevator shuddered and stopped at floor 38. The doors opened. It was Elias Thorne, Marcus's lead investigator. He was holding a tablet, his brow furrowed. He stepped into the elevator, smelling of expensive tobacco and cold iron. My heart stopped. I stared at the floor, my hands white-knuckled around the crate of water. "You're new," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Just started this morning, sir," I whispered, my voice trembling. This time, the fear wasn't an act. The elevator reached floor 42. I stepped out, my legs feeling like jelly. I didn't look back until the doors hissed shut. Floor 42 wasn't an office. It was a cathedral of data. Rows upon rows of black towers glowing with 1,000 blinking blue eyes. The air was frigid, kept at a constant temperature by the very liquid cooling tech that was currently strangling the world's privacy. I could see the pipes, translucent tubes filled with a glowing sapphire-colored fluid that snaked across the ceiling and into the walls. It looked beautiful. It looked like the future. It was a lie. I moved toward the central hub, the Alpha node. This was where the Phoenix Project would be activated. Once Marcus pressed that button in the boardroom, the data from every government agency would begin flowing through these blue veins. I pulled out the USB drive my father had left me. "Time to wake up, Dad," I whispered. I plugged it in. Immediately, the blue lights on the servers began to cycle through a frantic, strobe-like pattern. My father's code was beautiful. It didn't fight Marcus's system. It infected it. It convinced the liquid cooling system that the processors were running at 1,000,000 degrees. I watched the monitors. The cooling fluid began to pump faster and faster. The pressure in the pipes was rising. "Warning," a calm synthetic voice echoed through the room. "Thermal regulation bypass initiated. Pressure levels exceeding safety parameters." I wasn't destroying the data. I was creating a physical kill switch. If Marcus tried to activate the surveillance, the pipes would burst and the sapphire fluid, which I now realized was highly conductive, would fry every circuit in the building. I had given Marcus a choice. He could have his empire or he could have his tech. He couldn't have both. Suddenly, the monitor in front of me flickered to life. It wasn't my father's code anymore. A video feed appeared. It was the boardroom, 8 floors above. Marcus was standing at the head of the table. He was looking directly into the camera, directly at me. "I knew you couldn't resist the server room, Alara. You're so much like your father. You always think the hardware is the answer. But did you really think I'd let you walk into my heart without a guest pass?" The heavy steel doors at both ends of the server floor slammed shut. "Look at the pipes again, Alara," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. I looked up. The blue fluid wasn't just in the pipes anymore. It was leaking from the ceiling vents. It wasn't conductive fluid. It was a gas. Halon. The halon fire suppressant that replaces oxygen to protect the electronics. "You have approximately 4 minutes before the air in that room is gone, unless, of course, you use that brilliant mind of yours to input the bypass code I've sent to your tablet. Give me the Phoenix Group's final encryption keys, and I'll open the doors. It's a simple trade, Alara, your life for your father's ghost." I felt the first pang of dizziness. The air was getting thin, my vision blurred at the edges. I looked at the terminal. I looked at the small victory I had just achieved. It felt like ash in my mouth. You'll kill me anyway," I gasped, leaning against the server rack. "Maybe," Marcus mused, "but wouldn't you rather die as a billionaire than a ghost in an apron?" I reached for the keyboard, my fingers trembling, but I didn't type the encryption keys. I typed 3 words into the global broadcast channel, the one Marcus had prepared for his big announcement. "Are you watching?" I hit send just as my knees buckled. The screens in the boardroom, the screens in Times Square, the screens on every news station in the world flickered from Marcus's face to the live feed of him holding me hostage in the server room. "The world is watching, Marcus," I whispered, the darkness closing in. "Let's see how your stock handles a live-streamed murder." The air was a memory. My lungs felt like they were filled with dry sand. But on the monitors, those beautiful glowing monitors, I saw it. Marcus Vane's face transformed. The old lion didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a cornered rat. He turned his head sharply to the camera in the boardroom, his eyes wide. He had realized that the invisible girl had just turned the entire world into a witness. Open the doors, Marcus," I whispered into the microphone on the console. Across the globe, the feed was live. Millions of people were watching a billionaire execute his disgraced assistant in high definition. The Vane Global stock ticker at the bottom of the news feeds didn't just drop, it vanished. It was a vertical line towards zero. The hiss of the halon gas stopped. The heavy steel doors groaned and slid open. Fresh air rushed in like a tidal wave. I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing as my lungs greedily drank in the oxygen. I lay there for a second, staring at the blue cooling pipes. I had won. I had exposed him. I had survived. But then I heard the sound of footsteps, not the heavy boots of security guards, the light, rhythmic click of designer heels. "You were always too dramatic, Alara, just like your father." I froze. I knew that voice. I had heard it in my dreams and in my nightmares. I slowly pushed myself up, my vision still swimming in blurry streaks of blue and gray. Standing in the doorway wasn't Marcus, it wasn't Elias Thorne. It was my lawyer, the one who'd managed the Phoenix Trust for 3 years, the only person who knew where I slept, what I ate, and how I planned to destroy the Vanes. "Arthur?" I gasped. He looked down at me, his face devoid of the grandfatherly warmth he had shown me since my father's funeral. He held a tablet in his hand, the master override for the Phoenix Group's offshore accounts. "You thought a 25-year-old girl could manage a $10 billion fund without someone holding the leash?" Arthur asked. He stepped over a bundle of cables, his eyes cold. "Marcus didn't find you, Alara. I gave you to him." My mind raced, connecting the dots that I had been blinded by revenge to see. Arthur hadn't been protecting my father's legacy. He had been the one who helped Marcus steal it in the first place. He was the legal architect. "You were his friend," I choked out. "You stood at his grave."
"I stood at his grave to make sure he was actually in the ground," Arthur snapped. "Your father was a genius, but he was a dreamer. Dreamers don't build empires, they just provide the raw materials for men like Marcus. And you were the perfect distraction." He knelt down beside me, showing me the screen of his tablet. "While you were busy playing Ghost of Florida and airing Marcus's dirty laundry, you gave me the one thing I needed, a legal precedent of instability. By tanking the stock and live streaming this stunt, you've proven yourself mentally unfit to manage the Phoenix Group. As the lead trustee, I've just invoked the emergency clause. I've transferred the voting rights of the $10 billion to Marcus Vane, personally." The live stream. I thought it was my shield. But Arthur had used it as my cage. To the world, I looked like a martyr. To the law, I looked like a corporate terrorist who had just attempted to sabotage a global infrastructure project. "The SEC is on their way, Alara," Arthur said, standing up and straightening his tie, "but they aren't coming to arrest Marcus. They're coming to take you to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. By the time you get out, the Phoenix Project will be the only internet left in the world." He turned to leave, but then he stopped. "Oh, and Alara, your mother sends her regards. She's currently on a private jet to the Maldives. She was—" I sat on the floor of the server room, surrounded by the hum of a machine that no longer belonged to me. Through the open door, I could see the flash of police lights in the lobby below. I could hear the shouting. I was the villain now, the girl who tried to blow up the internet. Arthur was wrong about one thing, though. He thought I was like my father, a dreamer. He forgot that I had spent 3 years as Julian Vane's assistant. I didn't just learn how to make coffee. I learned how to hide things in plain sight. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a phone. I pulled out a small, physical key, the key to my father's old workshop in the Everglades. "You took the money, Arthur," I whispered, the first tear finally escaping. "And you took the company, Marcus. But you forgot about the physical backups. You forgot that my father never put his best work on a server." As the security team burst into the room to take me away, I didn't fight. I looked into the lens of the security camera, the one I knew Marcus was still watching. I didn't say a word. I just held up the key. The look of pure, unadulterated terror that crossed Marcus Vane's face in the boardroom was the best $10 billion I ever spent. He knew what that key opened, and he knew that the real war, the one with the real Phoenix, was only just beginning. They didn't put me in a police car. Marcus wanted me handled discreetly, which meant a private transport vehicle owned by a Vane subsidiary. I sat in the back, my wrists bound by heavy-duty zip ties that bit into my skin every time the van hit a pothole. They thought I was broken. They thought because Arthur had stolen my billions and my mother had sold my soul, I would just sit there and wait for the psychiatric evaluation that would effectively end my life. But as the van sped away from the glittering lights of Brickell and toward the dark, suffocating humidity of the outskirts, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about the $2 item I'd swiped from the server room floor while I was collapsing. A ceramic box cutter blade, small, non-metallic, invisible to the wand they'd passed over me. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just felt the zip ties give way. I kept my hands behind my back, waiting for the one thing Miami traffic always provides: a distraction. I didn't have to wait long. One of my pre-programmed chaos scripts had finally hit the city's traffic management system. At the intersection of 8th and 44th, every light turned green at once. The van slammed its brakes to avoid a T-bone collision. The guard in the back with me lunged forward, his head hitting the partition. I didn't hesitate. I threw my weight into the side door's manual override, a flaw in these older models I'd noted months ago. I rolled out into the wet asphalt, the smell of burnt rubber and swamp water filling my lungs. I didn't look back. I didn't run towards the sirens. I ran towards the tree line, towards the Everglades, towards the only place Marcus Vane's Phoenix eye couldn't see. I walked for 3 hours. The designer shoes I'd stolen from the hotel were ruined, my feet bleeding, but the air out here didn't taste like Halon. It tasted like home. Hidden beneath a canopy of cypress trees and Spanish moss was a corrugated metal shack. To any hunter, it looked like an abandoned gator poacher's hut, but when I pressed the signet ring key, the one I'd kept hidden in my cheek during the transport, into a knot in the wood, the shack hummed to life. This was my father's analog sanctuary. No cloud storage, no fiber optics, just copper wires, old-school vacuum tubes, and the dead man's switch he'd built when he realized Marcus Vane was a monster. I flipped the heavy industrial breakers. One by one, bank of CRT monitors flickered to life, casting an eerie green glow over the room. "Welcome back, Alara," I whispered to the empty room. "The game is finally fair." I sat at the terminal. I didn't have $10 billion anymore. Marcus and Arthur had the money, but they didn't have the frequency. My father's true masterpiece wasn't the cooling tech, it was the subaqueous pulse. If Marcus turned on the global surveillance network, he would be sending data through every pipe in the world. My strategy was simple. I wouldn't hack the network. I would overload it with a resident frequency that only this workshop could generate. I would turn his $10 billion panopticon into a $10 billion pile of melted plastic. I'm in the mud, I'm bleeding, and I'm fighting a man who owns the world. I haven't given up, but most of you would have. If you aren't subscribed yet, it means you're the kind of person who gives up when the bank account hits zero. Subscribe now to see how a girl with nothing but a rusty shack takes down a god. Subscribe or admit you're just a fan of the villains. I checked the newsfeed on a satellite-linked laptop. Marcus was standing on a podium. He was smiling. Tonight, he told the crowd, we activate the Phoenix. Tonight, the world becomes a safer, more connected place. Tonight, I countered, my hand hovering over a large red lever on the wall, the world finds out that the Phoenix is a flightless bird. I pulled the lever. Deep beneath the swamp, a massive diesel generator roared to life. The lights in the shack dimmed as the power was diverted to a subterranean antenna. On the screen, I watched the Vane Global headquarters in Miami. For a split second, the golden lights of the tower flickered. Just a blink, a heartbeat. Marcus paused in his speech, looking up at the ceiling. He felt it. He knew. Suddenly, a red alert flashed on my monitor. Not a system error, a GPS ping. Someone was standing outside the shack. Someone who hadn't tripped the perimeter alarms. I grabbed a heavy iron wrench and stood by the door, my heart hammering. The door creaked open. A figure stood in the moonlight. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't the police. It was Julian. He was covered in mud, his face bruised, wearing a cheap tracksuit. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and hope. "They let me out, Alara," he rasped. "My father, he tried to have me killed in the holding cell. He wanted to close the liability. I know where the master key is. I know how to stop him. Please, let me in." I stared at Julian Vane. The man who had once treated me like gum on the bottom of his $1,200 shoes was now shivering in a swamp, smelling of stagnant water and failure. "Why should I believe you?" I asked. "You've been his lapdog your whole life. You loved the power. You loved the cruelty when it was directed at me." "Because I saw the blueprints," Julian said, stepping into the dim green light of the monitors. "I saw what the Phoenix Eye does to the people who build it. He's not just watching the world, Alara. He's rewriting it. He's going to use the pulse to delete the debts of his friends and the identities of his enemies. He's going to become the only source of truth." I looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, I didn't see a CEO. I saw a man who had realized he was nothing more than a disposable asset in his father's ledger. "If you're lying to me, Julian," I said, my voice like ice, "I won't call the police. I'll just leave you out here for the gators. Do you understand?" He nodded frantically. "I have the bypass codes for the physical cooling vents. Marcus changed the digital ones, but the manual overrides are still keyed to the Vane biometric signature. My signature. It was the missing piece. I could overload the system from here, but without the manual vent control, the building's fire suppression would kick in before the hardware actually melted. I needed Julian to choke the building from the inside. I sat back down at the terminal. "Sit," I commanded. "We have 4 hours until the global launch. If we're going to do this, we do it my way." We worked in silence for an hour. Julian's hands were shaking, but he knew the internal architecture better than anyone.
Together, we wove my father's dead man's switch into the very heart of the Vane global mainframe. It was a digital suicide pact. I was navigating the deepest subdirectories of my father's analog drive, looking for the final resonant frequency when I hit a locked partition. It was labeled Ilara, read last. My heart hammered. I bypassed the lock. It wasn't a blueprint, it was a legal document, a real one. No, I whispered. What is it? Julian leaned over. I stared at the screen. My father hadn't just built a dead man's switch to destroy the tech. He had built it to protect me. But the price was written in the fine print of the patent law. The frequency I was about to send wouldn't just melt Marcus's servers. Because the tech was based on my father's biometric resonance, the pulse would also target any DNA match to the original creator that was currently logged into the system's interface. Ilara, look, Julian pointed to the live feed. Marcus wasn't alone in the boardroom anymore. He had brought someone in, someone he was forcing to act as the living key to initiate the launch. It was my mother, Elena. She wasn't on a jet to the Maldives. Marcus had used her as a backup because she carried my father's legal legacy through their marriage. Her biometric signature was the only thing that could verify the final launch of the Phoenix Eye. If I pulled the lever, if I sent the pulse to destroy the machine, the resonance wouldn't just fry the circuits, it would fry the person standing at the terminal. It would kill my mother. I stood in front of the red lever, my hand hovered inches from the cold iron. He knew, I whispered. Marcus knew about the resonance. He's not using her to launch the project, he's using her to stop me from killing it. Julian looked at me, horror etched into his face. Ilara, if you do this, you're not a hero. You're just like him. I looked at the monitor. My mother looked terrified. She was crying, her hands pressed against the glass interface. She looked like the woman I remembered from my childhood, the one who used to tuck me in and tell me that the world was a kind place. Then she looked directly into the camera. She knew I was watching. She didn't mouth, "I'm sorry." She didn't mouth, "Save me." She mouthed, "Do it." The shock hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't a victim, she was atoning. She had realized the horror of what she had helped Marcus build, and she was giving me permission to end it at the cost of her life. I gripped the lever. My eyes were blurred with tears. "Julian," I said, my voice steadying into something terrifyingly calm, "get out of the shack." "Ilara, wait." "Get out," I screamed. As Julian ran into the night, I looked at the screen one last time. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered. I didn't pull the lever down, I pushed it up. The monitors didn't explode. Instead, they turned a deep, bloody red. A new timer appeared on the screen. 3 hours until global broadcast. I wasn't going to just destroy the machine. I was going to use the 3 hours I had left to rewrite the Phoenix Eye to broadcast Marcus's soul to the entire planet before I let it burn. 3 hours. In 3 hours, the world would either become a digital prison or the greatest courtroom in human history. I wasn't just Ilara the assistant anymore. I was the executioner. I sat at the terminal, my fingers moving across the keys with a fluidity that felt like dancing. I wasn't fighting Marcus's firewall, I was consuming it. My father's analog frequency acted like a master key, vibrating the digital locks until they simply shattered. "Julian," I said, not looking away from the green glow of the CRT, "if you're still out there, listen to me. I need the access codes to the Vane private archive, not the corporate one, the one Marcus keeps in his study." Julian's voice came from the shadows of the doorway, hesitant. "Ilara, if you give me those, there's no going back. That's where he keeps the legacy files. It's not just business, it's the names of the politicians he's bought, the judges, the families he's erased." "Good," I whispered. "I want the world to see the roots of the rot." Suddenly, a high-pitched whine cut through the humid night air, a predator drone. Marcus wasn't waiting for the law. He had dispatched his own private air force. Elias Thorne was no longer tracking a signal. He was tracking a heat signature in the middle of a swamp where nothing else was burning. "They're here," Julian hissed, diving away from the window. I didn't move. I couldn't. If I disconnected, the broadcast would fail, and my mother's sacrifice and my father's life would be for nothing. "Let them come," I said, my voice eerily steadying. "The shack is lined with copper mesh. It's a Faraday cage. They can't see what's inside, and they can't hack it from the air. They have to come to the door."
I looked at the secondary monitor. A thermal map showed 3 black SUVs navigating the narrow dirt track 2 miles away. Elias Thorne was leading the charge. I ignored the approaching hunters and focused on the screen. The archive was open. I saw it all. The bribes paid to the patent office to bury my father's claims, the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands used to pay for the accidents of rival developers, and then I found the crown jewel, a recorded conversation between Marcus and Arthur from 10 years ago. "The girl is a non-factor, Arthur," Marcus's voice crackled through the speakers. "As long as she thinks her father was a failure, she'll never look for the truth. Keep her close, keep her poor. Poverty is the best cage we ever built." I felt a tear hit the back of my hand, but I didn't wipe it away. I let it fuel the fire. I dragged that file into the global broadcast queue. "They're at the perimeter," Julian whispered. He had picked up the iron wrench I'd dropped earlier. He looked terrified, but he didn't run. I saw a red dot dance across the wall of the shack, a laser sight. Elias Thorne's voice boomed from a megaphone outside, competing with the roar of the wind. "Ilara, step out with your hands up. Marcus is offering a deal. You walk away with your life, and the woman in the boardroom lives. You have 60 seconds before we level this structure." I looked at the timer on my screen, 004512 until broadcast. "I don't take deals from dead men, Elias," I screamed back. I hit the emergency shield button. Outside, the swamp erupted in a blinding white light. I had rigged the diesel generators to a series of high-intensity stadium lights buried in the mud. For a few precious seconds, the mercenaries would be blind. The door groaned under the weight of a ram. I didn't look at the door, I looked at the final file. It was a video from the Vane boardroom, live-fed into my system. I saw my mother. She was standing perfectly still, her eyes closed. Marcus was behind her, his hand on her shoulder, looking like a proud husband. He thought he was untouchable. 20 seconds, Ilara," shouted Elias. I gripped the manual override lever. This was it. The execution wasn't just a metaphor. By starting the broadcast, I was initiating the resonance. "Julian," I said, my voice trembling for the first time, "if I don't make it out, tell the world who my father was." "You're going to tell them yourself," Julian said, stepping in front of the door, bracing himself against the inevitable breach. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer to a father I barely remembered. I slammed the execute key. The monitors turned from green to a blinding, brilliant white. Across the world, every television, every smartphone, and every billboard in Times Square went black for 3 seconds. Then Marcus Vane's voice filled the planet. But as the broadcast started, the door to the shack finally shattered. I saw the silhouette of Elias Thorne, his rifle leveled at my chest. "End of the line, Ghost," he growled. He pulled the trigger. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a coffin. I waited for the coldness. I waited for the world to fade to black, and for the pressure of the lead to tear through my chest and end the 3-year nightmare. But the pain didn't come for me. I opened my eyes. The shack was filled with the smell of gunpowder and ozone. Elias Thorne was still standing in the doorway, his rifle smoking, but his eyes were wide with a rare flicker of hesitation. In front of me, Julian had slumped against the terminal. He hadn't been bracing the door. He had stepped into the line of fire. "Julian," I screamed, lunging forward to catch him before he hit the floor. He coughed, a spray of red blooming across his cheap tracksuit. "He really did try to kill me, Ilara," he whispered, his voice bubbling. "I guess I'm not a Vane anymore." Elias stepped forward to finish the job, but suddenly he froze. His radio erupted with a scream of static so loud he had to drop his weapon to cover his ears. The monitors in the shack weren't just showing the broadcast anymore. Because I had initiated the resonance, the Phoenix Eye had created a 2-way neural bridge. The shack was no longer just a room in the Everglades. It was a node in the global mind Marcus had built. The air in the room began to vibrate. My father's tech was working. It was pulling the keys, Marcus in the boardroom and me in the shack, into a shared digital space. I didn't see the shack anymore. I didn't see Elias. I was standing in a void of pure light, and 10 feet away from me stood Marcus Vane, not the old man in a suit, but a towering holographic projection of his ego.
"You've killed my son, Ilara," Marcus's voice boomed, echoing from every corner of the void.
You've destroyed my company. Was it worth it? Look at your mother. Look what you're doing to her." In the center of the light, I saw her, my mother, Elena. She was suspended in the digital stream, her body flickering like a dying candle. The resonance was tearing her apart. "Alara," her voice reached me, not through my ears, but through my mind. Don't look at me. Look at him. He's afraid." Marcus laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Afraid? I am the network, Ilara. I am every secret, every bank account, every breath this world takes. You are just a girl with a grudge. Disconnect now and I'll let her live. I'll let you live." I looked at the woman who had sold me out, then at the man who had bought her. "You don't understand, Marcus," I said, stepping forward into the light. "I'm not trying to live. I'm trying to finish the job." I reached out my hand. In this digital space, I didn't need a keyboard. I needed my memory. I forced the network to play the archive files I'd unlocked, not just to the world, but to Marcus himself. I forced him to feel the weight of every life he'd stepped on. I showed him my father's final hours. I showed him the hunger I felt when I was 21, working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on while he bought his 3rd yacht. "This isn't your empire, Marcus," I shouted over the rising roar of the pulse. "This is a graveyard, and you're just the caretaker." His holographic form began to flicker. The arrogance in his eyes was replaced by a primal, animalistic terror. He tried to disconnect, but the dead man's switch had locked him in. He was tied to the resonance. "Ilara, stop!" Marcus screamed, his form beginning to dissolve into static. "The pulse! It will kill everyone at the terminal! Your mother, you! We all die together!" I looked at my mother one last time. She smiled. A real smile. The one I hadn't seen since I was a child. "It's okay, Ilara," she whispered. "Let the phoenix burn." I didn't hesitate. I reached for the final execute button in the center of the void. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said. "Tell my father I kept the crown." I slammed my hand down. In the physical world, the Vane Global Tower erupted, not with fire, but with a blinding blue light that fried every circuit in a 10-block radius. In the shack, the monitors exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Elias Thorne dropping his rifle and falling to his knees as the Phoenix Eye died a screaming digital death. And then there was only the sound of the rain. The first thing I tasted was copper. The second was ash. I opened my eyes, but the world was just a blur of gray smoke and jagged shadows. The shack, my father's sanctuary, was gone. The roof had been peeled back by the pressure of the pulse, and the tropical rain was falling directly onto the melted remains of the CRT monitors. I tried to move, but my arm was pinned under a fallen timber. The silence was the worst part. No hum of the servers, no buzz of the insects, just the rain. "Julian?" I croaked. No answer. I looked to my left. The spot where Julian had fallen was empty. There was a smear of blood on the floor trailing out toward the open door, but he was gone. Elias Thorne's rifle lay in the mud, twisted and blackened as if it had been struck by lightning. I was alone in the wreckage of a war I thought I had just finished. I managed to shove the timber off my arm, the pain a white-hot spike that forced a scream from my throat. I crawled toward the emergency sat phone I'd stashed in a lead-lined box beneath the floorboards. It was the only piece of tech that could have survived the resonance. The screen flickered to life. I didn't see the justice headline I expected. Instead, every newsfeed was a wall of red. Global blackout. The Phoenix terrorist strikes. Billions lost as Ilara Vance triggers archive wipe. Marcus Vane declared a hero in missing persons search. My stomach turned. The pulse hadn't just exposed Marcus. It had fried the grid so badly that the very evidence I'd broadcast was cut off before it could be verified. To the world, I hadn't exposed a predator. I had just shut down the world's banks, hospitals, and communications. I wasn't the savior. I was the most wanted woman on the planet. I checked the live feed archives that had cached before the crash. I saw the Vane Global boardroom. The blue light had blinded the cameras, but in the final frame before the feed died, I saw the terminal where my mother had stood. It was melted into a puddle of glass. But Marcus? Marcus wasn't there. He had moved. He knew exactly the millisecond the pulse would hit. He used my mother as a lightning rod, letting her take the brunt of the biometric surge while he slipped out through a private elevator. He wasn't dead. He wasn't even arrested. He was a victim of my terrorist attack, probably sitting in a secure bunker right now, spinning the narrative that I was a madwoman who couldn't handle losing her father's legacy. He didn't just win the round, he stole the referee. I looked at the sat phone. Comments were flooding the few surviving social media nodes that were still running on emergency power. She killed the internet. My business is gone because of some girl's grudge. Find her. Hang her. Marcus Vane warned us about her. He was trying to protect us. I dropped the phone. I couldn't stay here. The smoke from the shack was a beacon for every drone still in the sky. I grabbed a small emergency pack and turned to the door, but a shadow blocked the moonlight. "You look like hell, Ilara." I froze. It wasn't Julian. It wasn't Elias. It was Arthur, my lawyer, the man who had sold the Phoenix Group to Marcus. He was leaning against a cypress tree holding a satellite tracker. He looked remarkably clean for someone standing in a swamp. "You're late, Arthur," I said, my hand reaching for a jagged piece of glass on the floor. "The party's over. The machine is dead." "The machine is a prototype, Ilara," Arthur said, walking into the ruins. "Marcus has 3 more, in Singapore, London, and Zurich. You didn't stop the Phoenix. You just gave him a reason to start the emergency protocol. He's declaring martial law over the Vane Global infrastructure tonight." Arthur held out a hand. Not to help me up, but to demand something. "Marcus is looking for you, but I can make you disappear. I have a boat waiting 2 miles from here. All I want is the one thing you didn't destroy. Your father's original hard copy ledger, the one that proves Marcus didn't just steal the tech, he stole the company's founding capital from the U.S. Treasury." I looked at him, then at the dark, murky water of the swamp. I realized then that I was in a den of snakes, and the only way out was to become the venom. "I don't have the ledger, Arthur," I said, a cold, dark smile spreading across my face. "I am the ledger. I memorized every page before I burned it." Arthur's eyes narrowed. He took a step toward me, but before he could speak, a red dot appeared on his chest. A sniper's laser. "The question is," I whispered, "who's aiming at you? Marcus or the person I just called?" Arthur froze. The red dot on his chest was perfectly still, a tiny, lethal ember burning against the fabric of his $5,000 silk tie. He didn't breathe. He knew whoever was behind that lens wasn't interested in a conversation. "Who did you call, Ilara?" he hissed, his voice finally losing its polished edge. "I didn't call anyone, Arthur," I whispered. "Maybe the ghosts of the people you've ruined finally decided to pick up a rifle." The silence was broken by a voice that crackled through a long-range comms unit hidden in the trees. It wasn't the voice of a mercenary. It was a voice that sounded like gravel grinding against velvet. "Drop the tracker, Arthur, or I'll see how much that silk tie can hold back." Arthur's hands shook as he let the satellite device thud into the mud. From the thick curtain of Spanish moss, a figure emerged. He moved with a limp, his arm in a makeshift sling, but the sniper rifle in his steady hand never wavered. It was Elias Thorne, Marcus Vane's head of security, the man who had hunted me across Miami, the man who had pulled the trigger in the shack. I stared at him, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. "You shot Julian. You tried to kill me." Elias didn't look at me. His eyes were locked on Arthur. "I shot the partition, Ilara. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have heard the bang. I've spent 20 years doing Marcus Vane's dirty work because I thought he was a necessary evil. But when he used your mother as a battery, when he told me to let his own son bleed out in a swamp, even a dog knows when his master has gone rabid. He kicked Arthur's legs out from under him, forcing the lawyer into the mud. I'm not here for you, Alara, Elias said, his voice dropping to a gravelly rasp. I'm here because Marcus has a secret that even I wasn't supposed to know, a secret that's buried in the basement of the Vane family estate. What secret? I asked, my voice barely audible over the wind. Elias looked at me then, and for the first time I saw pity in the eyes of a killer.
Your father never made it to the hospital, Elias said. He was alive when Marcus took the patents. He was alive when they moved the servers into the new headquarters. Marcus didn't just steal his tech, Alara. He stole him. The world tilted. My father, he hadn't been a memory. He had been a prisoner. He's been kept in a high-security medical wing beneath the Coral Gables estate for 15 years, Elias continued. Marcus used him as a living consultant to debug the Phoenix project. He's the reason the tech works, and he's the reason the resonance didn't kill you tonight. He modified the code from the inside to protect your DNA signature. I fell to my knees, the mud soaking into my clothes, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt a rage so pure it threatened to burn the oxygen out of my lungs. 15 years. 15 years of me crying over an empty grave. 15 years of me living in poverty while my father was being drained of his genius in a basement, like a piece of equipment. Marcus Vane hadn't just stolen our... I stood up. I wasn't the invisible girl anymore. I wasn't the Phoenix. I was a daughter who had just found out her father was still in the fight. Where is he, Elias? I asked. My voice was no longer trembling. It was the sound of a closing trap. The Coral Gables estate, level 4, Elias said. Marcus is headed there now. He knows the global blackout bought him time, but he's going to clean house before the SEC regroups. That means your father is a loose end he's about to cut. I looked at Arthur, groveling in the mud. I looked at Elias, the man who had been my shadow. Arthur, I said, leaning down so my face was inches from his, you're going to give me the bypass codes for the estate's private security, and then you're going to call the news stations. You're going to tell them the truth, or Elias is going to see how well you can swim in the swamp with a hole in your lung. Arthur scrambled for his phone, nodding frantically. I turned to Elias. I need a weapon, and I need a way into that house that Marcus hasn't mapped. Elias handed me a heavy black sidearm. There's an old drainage tunnel from the original construction. Your father designed it. He called it the overflow. I think he was waiting for you, Alara. I checked the magazine. Then let's go. It's time to show Marcus Vane what happens when the overflow finally breaks. The air in the drainage tunnel smelled of salt and old concrete. This was the overflow, my father's hidden vein beneath the Vane estate. He didn't build it for water. He built it for an exit, a way out that he never got to use. Beside me, Elias Thorne was a shadow. He moved without sound, the red laser of his rifle sweeping the dark like a hungry eye. My hand was steady on the grip of the sidearm he'd given me. I wasn't an assistant anymore. I wasn't even the Phoenix. I was a force of nature. Level 4 is directly above us, Elias whispered, the sound bouncing off the wet walls. Marcus has his private security on the lawn, thinking you'll come through the gates. He doesn't know the basement is breathing. I looked at the ceiling. Somewhere above me, my father was in a cage. 15 years of stolen breaths. 15 years of brilliant thoughts harvested like grain. I felt a heat in my chest that could have melted the foundation of this house. We didn't knock. Elias placed a breaching charge on the service hatch. When it blew, it wasn't a roar, it was a sigh of compressed air. We surged upward. The medical wing was a sterile nightmare of white tile and blue light. It looked more like a laboratory than a hospital. I saw the monitors first, thousands of them, scrolling through code that looked like my father's handwriting in digital form. 2 guards turned, their hands reaching for their holsters. Elias didn't give them the chance. 2 shots, suppressed, and the path was clear. "Go," Elias hissed, taking a defensive position by the elevator. "Find him." I ran past the server racks, past the stolen life's work of the man I loved most. And then I saw the glass room. He was sitting in a chair, his back to me. He looked so small. His hair was white, long and thin like spider silk. He was staring at a screen, his fingers twitching in the air as if he were still typing on a keyboard that wasn't there. "Dad," I whispered. The figure froze. He slowly turned the chair. His eyes were milky with cataracts, but when they landed on me, they cleared with a shock of recognition that shattered my heart into a million pieces. "Alara?" he said. His voice was a dry rasp, the sound of wind through dead leaves. You grew up. You have your mother's eyes." I fell against the glass. "I'm here, Dad. I'm taking you home." "Home? There is no home for him, Alara." I spun around. Marcus Vane stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing a suit anymore. He was in a tactical vest, a heavy revolver in his hand. He looked older, his face twisted by the realization that his empire was a bonfire. "You should have died in the swamp," Marcus spat. "I gave your father a purpose. I gave his genius a canvas the world could actually see. Without me, he's just a broken man in a shed." "Without you," I said, stepping between him and my father's glass cage, "he would have been a hero. You didn't give him a canvas, you gave him a shroud." Marcus raised the revolver. "I built this world, Alara. I'm not letting a ghost tear it down." He pulled the trigger, but Marcus had forgotten one thing. He was standing in a room designed by my father, a room where every piece of tech was part of the overflow. My father's hand moved. He didn't pick up a weapon. He tapped a single command on the glass interface beside his chair. The floor beneath Marcus erupted in a localized electromagnetic pulse. The revolver flew from his hand as the tactical vest's electronics shorted-circuited, pinning him against the wall like a magnet. I didn't shoot him. I didn't have to. I walked up to the man who owned me, my father, and the city of Miami. I looked him in his terrified, fading eyes. "You said poverty was the best cage you ever built, Marcus. But you were wrong. Silence is, and the world is about to get very loud." I reached over and hit the global override on the master console. Outside the estate, the sirens of the FBI, the SEC, and the local police finally arrived. But they weren't just coming for a terrorist. Every screen in the world flickered to life. It wasn't the Phoenix. It was a live feed of the basement. The world saw the white-haired man in the glass cage. They saw the blood on Marcus's hands. The mask wasn't just cracked. It was gone. The air outside the estate didn't taste like the swamp, and it didn't taste like the sterile laboratory. It tasted like salt and the coming dawn. I carried my father, or what was left of him, out through the front gates. He weighed almost nothing, a skeleton held together by memories and a stubborn refusal to die. His head rested on my shoulder, his white hair whipping in the wind. For the first time in 15 years, the sun touched his skin. Behind us, the Vane estate was a hive of blue and red lights. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see them lead Marcus away in the same zip ties that I had escaped from. I didn't need to see the federal agents seizing the servers. "Look, Dad," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "The horizon, it's still there." He didn't speak. He just gripped my hand with a strength I didn't know he still possessed. He was looking at the ocean, the same ocean he used to tell me stories about before the world turned gray. We sat on a stone bench near the water's edge, watched over by a perimeter of SEC agents who now treated me like a sovereign queen rather than a fugitive. I pulled out a small tablet. The markets were opening. Vane Global, VNE, $0.
The company didn't just crash, it was liquidated. Every asset, every building, every stolen patent was being frozen and moved into a court-ordered restitution fund. I checked the Phoenix Group ledger. The $10 billion was in my control. Arthur had tried to hide it, but with Marcus in custody, the legal house of cards had collapsed. I was the richest woman in Florida again. But as I looked at my father, who was marveling at the sight of a seagull, I realized the money was just numbers on a screen. The real wealth was the fact that I could finally breathe without permission. "Your mother," my father rasped, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "She's gone, Dad," I said, the words feeling like stones in my throat. "She made sure the signal went through. She saved us." I didn't tell him she had sold us out first. I didn't tell him about the penthouse or the Maldives jet. I let him keep the version of her that he loved. In the end, she had chosen to be a hero, and that was the only truth that mattered now. Elias Thorne walked over to us. He had a bandage on his shoulder and a weariness in his eyes that matched my own. He handed me a single, physical file. "It's the names of the remaining board members," Elias said. "They're all resigning. They want to make a deal. They think if you give you the chairmanship, you'll stop the lawsuits." I looked at the file. The crown I had fought for, the seat at the head of the table where Julian used to sit. "Tell them I don't want the chair," I said, not even opening the folder. "I'm dissolving Vane Global. Every building is being converted into low-income housing."
The sun was fully above the Atlantic now, a brilliant gold that turned the water into a sheet of fire. The Phoenix wasn't a company. It wasn't a bank account. It was this moment. The moment when the secrets were dead and the truth was the only thing left standing. "What now, Ilara?" my father asked. I looked at the ruins of the Vane Empire in the distance, then back at the man who gave me my soul. "Now," I said, "we go find a place where nobody knows our names. We go find a place where the coffee is always the right temperature and nobody has to be a ghost." As we walked toward the waiting car, I saw a familiar face in the crowd of reporters. It was Chloe, Julian's girlfriend. She looked desperate, holding a microphone, trying to get a quote. "Ilara! Ilara! What do you have to say to the millions of people who lost their jobs today?" I stopped. I looked her right in the eye, the woman who had mocked my poor girl smell. I didn't say a word. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out a $5 bill, and handed it to her. "Buy yourself a coffee, Chloe," I said. "I hear the world is a very cold place when you're invisible." I closed the car door, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt at peace. 6 months later, I sat on the porch of a small cedar wood house in the mountains of North Carolina. There's no marble here, no gold-tinted glass, just the smell of pine, the sound of the wind through the valleys, and the silence of a life reclaimed. My father was in the garden, his hands stained with real soil instead of digital ink. His memory is still a fractured mirror. Some days he thinks I'm 10 years old, and some days he remembers the exact line of code that changed the world. But he is free. He is no longer a consultant. He is a man who likes to grow tomatoes. I looked at the laptop on my lap. I don't check stock tickers anymore. I check the progress of the Vance Foundation. Across the globe, the tech Marcus stole is being used to provide encrypted, free communication for those who need it most. We didn't just break the machine, we recycled it into a shield. I received a letter this morning. It was postmarked from a minimum security facility in Florida. Julian. He wrote to tell me that he's teaching a business ethics class to the other inmates. He said he finally understands why I never liked the espresso he made. It wasn't the temperature, it was the hand that served it. He'll be out in 2 years. I've set up a trust for him, not millions, but enough to start over. Not because he deserves it, but because I refuse to let the vain cycle of hatred define my future. To be a Vance is to build. To be a Vane was to destroy.
I'm choosing to build. As for Marcus, he's in a different kind of cage, a high-security unit where the only thing he has to look at are the four walls and the legacy of a name that is now synonymous with the word thief. He wanted to be a god. Now he's just a prisoner of the truth. I looked out over the mist-covered mountains. People ask me if I miss the power. They ask if I miss the $10 billion or the thrill of the hunt. The truth is, the most powerful I ever felt wasn't when I hit execute on the global broadcast. It was the moment I stopped being invisible to myself. We spend our lives chasing the things Marcus Vane had, the titles, the towers, the control. We think that if we're loud enough and rich enough, we'll finally be safe. But safety isn't a penthouse. Safety is being able to look in the mirror and know that your soul isn't for sale. I was the invisible girl. I was the ghost in the machine. And the secret I learned is that the ghosts are the ones who actually run the world. The assistants, the janitors, the daughters. We see everything because the lions are too busy looking at their own reflections to notice the grass moving. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old signet ring, the one that started it all. I walked down to the edge of the lake and felt the cool weight of it in my palm. It represented a mother who betrayed me and a father who was stolen. It represented the fire that nearly consumed me. I didn't keep it. I didn't put it in a safe. I threw it into the water. Let the lake have the gold. I have the man who gave it to me. And that is enough. My story is over, but yours is still being written. You've seen the rise, the fall, and the rebirth. You've seen what happens when one person decides that invisible doesn't mean powerless. If you've made it to this final minute, you're not just a listener, you're a witness. You've seen the truth, and now you have a choice. You can go back to being a ghost, or you can start building your own empire, one that's based on something more than greed. Subscribe to this channel right now to make sure you never miss the next epic. Comment, "I am not invisible," below to let the world know you're still standing. And if you think this story could change someone's life, share it.